Now, the original Indian Chief first started production almost 100 years ago now, so you'd very much hope they'd had time to refine the formula. And this year marked a pretty significant update with a complete redesign and a distinct visual change. So of course I was keen to borrow one and find out, has it shunned all tradition, or does it still have a bit of old school charm?
Out on the road, it's pretty much everything you'd expect from a heavyweight American cruiser. Starting with the engine, it's a big 1.8 litre V-twin, and it's all about torque, 162 Newton meters, right down at 3,250 RPM. It does like to rev a little bit though, up at 4,000, up to the 5,000 rev line. There's quite a surprising amount of power. You know, like drop it down into second or third and give it some gas and it's, whoa, it really is quite fast. But realistically, it's primarily built for that ability to chug along, and at 70 on the motorway in 6th gear, it's doing about 2,500 RPM, so barely ticking over, and yet it has such a lot of pull down low in the rev range that you don't even need to shift down to overtake. Just give it a bit of throttle and off it goes. Now the chassis is pretty typical for the genre as well. It's big, 300 kilograms, nice and long, the forks are raked out for that stability, and it really does feel planted, cruising along in a straight line. That doesn't mean it won't handle at all though. The suspension is surprisingly composed, especially on the fork. I've been impressed with how it copes under braking. And the shocks are a little more cushy, so it does have a nice comfortable ride. Look, it's never going to be a direct competitor for a Fireblade, but that doesn't mean you can't have some fun on it. Brakes are, well, they're in line with the competition. You don't typically get bitey, powerful front brakes on these big cruisers. And it's the same here, a little bit soft. But to compensate, there's a big disc on the rear. And if you use a bit of both, if you adapt your riding style, there's enough to haul it up, even though it is, like I say, quite a heavy machine. Good God, this is steep. Oh, flipping heck. Now it's a super low seat, 660mm, which must be one of the lowest I've ever ridden. But it is nice and comfortable. Everything else is to my taste. Nice wide flat bars. I prefer those to like ape hangers. Mid-position pegs, much more to my taste as well. And I could definitely do some miles on this thing. I mean, all in all, I'd sum up the ride by saying that you can push it on a bit, but fundamentally it just ticks all the cruiser boxes really well. But you know, it's not entirely an old school traditional cruiser. There are quite a few techie touches, just done in a bit of a stealthy way. I mean, for a start, you've got rear cylinder deactivation. So the cylinder under the seat here shuts off at a standstill. The front one keeps the engine spinning, and that saves you from boiling your balls in traffic. No need to press any buttons or anything. As soon as you get back on the throttle, the rear cylinder kicks in again. The LED headlight adds a bit of a modern touch to the front end. You've got integrated tail lights as well, which keeps the rear end looking super clean. The only downside is I don't think you can yet sell LED indicators as stock on the American market, so you're stuck with these big orange ones at the front, but that's an easy mod for most people if you want to swap in something a little smaller. You've got keyless ignition, which works really well. Cruise control, which is an absolute must for me on a bike like this. I would prefer the buttons for it to be on the left switchgear so that you could hold your speed with the throttle and then use your other hand for setting the cruise control, but ultimately that's something you'll probably get used to with a bit of time. Now, there's not a lot of rider aids, but you do get a few modes for the throttle response, so rain, road and sport, and that's managed through this 4-inch round TFT display. Tech-wise, this is the best feature of the bike, but they've done it in a way that actually is really tasteful and visually in keeping with the rest of the styling. Now, you've got all the usual readouts for speed and gear and revs and whatnot, but you also get phone and headset connectivity, and there's a button on the switchgear for controlling music and phone calls. But I think my favorite feature is the built-in sat nav, and it doesn't just mirror your phone or an app. It's all built in and you can control it with a touchscreen, and for me that just adds a touch of convenience. Sometimes it's slightly annoying to have to pull over and get your phone out to change where you're heading to, and I have also had a few occasions where you're using a system that mirrors your phone but there's no GPS or phone signal, and you end up just having to wing it until your phone wakes up again. This, I've used it plenty and it really really is pretty good. Now, Harley announced a very similar looking round TFT display with similar capabilities on the new Sportster S. But the thing is, that bike is more of a competitor for the Scout, whereas this bike goes head to head with a larger capacity Softail lineup. Some of the ones with a bigger fairing do get a rectangular TFT display, but the more sort of naked bikes in the Softail lineup have very simple dashes. So that's a massive benefit of the Chief. But I've got to say, the thing that I think they've really nailed here are the looks. Now, if you can cast your mind back to the previous generation of the Chief, it had those huge bathtub mudguards, instantly recognizable as an Indian, but I think they've done the right thing in getting rid of them. It just makes for a much more lean and svelte looking machine. Now, this one sits at the bottom of the range. It's the Dark Horse. You've got the Super Chief at the top, which is more in a touring spec, the regular Chief in the middle. But this one, despite being the entry point, I think it's my favorite. I absolutely love the finish, especially this stealth grey paint job. Almost every component finished in black, but then you've just got this grey to lift it on the mudguards and tank. There are just loads of little touches that give it that premium edge. The Indian logo on the seat, the stitching and perforation. The logo on the tank has a bit of classic cool to it. The badges on the engine are a lovely touch. I especially like this little loop in the frame at the front that's exposed and the little Indian logo here. The cut wheels as well give it a bit of flair, but I think for me, it's just the overall shape and stance of the bike. To me, it just looks like the perfectly proportioned cruiser.
And so there we have it, a classic cruiser, but built for 2021. As for pricing, well, it starts just shy of 16 grand, which of course gets you a lot of bike elsewhere. But you do feel like you're getting something pretty special with the Chief. It's a lot of metal for your money, beautifully finished, and with a bit more tech than you might expect too. So if you do fancy a proper cruiser but without going the obvious route, then you should definitely give this one a try.